Hey guys, LevelCap here. Today we're going to be doing a full review on Tom Clancy's The Division. This is Ubisoft's fastest selling game in history, and that's no small statement considering that Ubisoft is one of the biggest game publishers in the entire world. There's been a huge amount of hype surrounding this game, a huge amount of naysayers as well, and I'm here today to hopefully clarify how the game is, how well it plays out during the main campaign, multiplayer, and endgame. I've sunk over 30 hours into the game. I've got plenty of gold weapons, I've maxed out my text trees, I've explored pretty much every aspect of the game as it stands, and I have a pretty good idea on how it plays out in the end game as well. Now, if you don't want to stick around for the full review, I'll give you a very quick overview of what I'm going to be talking about. The campaign I thought was enjoyable to play through, not too heavy on story for the most part, so if you're really into an engaging story, this game's mostly about the setting and ambiance. It's a very, very detailed, sculpted world. When you get to the end game, you're pretty much limited to running high-level missions that are the same as the missions you ran through in the campaign, just with tankier bad guys. And then there's the Dark Zone, which is supposed to be this lawless environment. However, at the moment, the penalties for engaging other players are so high that it doesn't really make much sense. I believe Ubisoft is going to try and remedy this at some point, but at the moment, it's kind of broken when it comes to the end game, and I have a feeling in a day or two I'm going to run out of things that I really want to do in this game. Alright, let's start off by talking about one of the more popular criticisms of this game that I've heard people complain about, and that's just the bullet sponge nature of the bad guys. Putting round after round into your enemies in this game looks very unrealistic and kind of comical at times. This kind of damage model works out much better in cartoony games like Borderlands, but the Division has gone for a very dark and realistic approach to designing the environment, city, and characters, yet when you see them absorb 100 rounds from a machine gun, which you will see on some of the tankier bosses, it just seems kind of silly, especially when they're not really wearing heavy armor but like a hoodie and some jeans. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up visually, and I think a lot of people have problems with that. Now, if you are familiar with traditional RPG games where you're gaining experience, gaining items, very Diablo-esque in a way, you will be familiar with bad guys being very tanky. And if you can accept that as a game style in this environment, then you shouldn't have a problem with it. But if you have a problem with very bullet spongy bad guys, then this game might not appeal to you. Personally, I'm totally fine with it. To me, it's kind of like a first-person shooter version of Diablo. And when you get to those higher levels, you need better gear and you need to better sculpt your character to drop players faster. Sure, some bad guys might seem very tanky, but if you get better and better gear, you'll be able to drop them faster and faster. I think it adds a lot of strategy to your character building, and it also makes some bad guys incredibly hard to defeat, or while you're working on defeating them, other bad guys will come up behind you and flank you. It can actually be quite challenging fighting NPCs, which is a hard thing to do in a modern FPS, especially when you're playing with a bunch of veteran gamers that are incredibly accurate and skilled at shooter games, and then they team up together and work on strategies. How do you make NPCs that can defeat that group of player? Well, you got to make them tanky, you got to make their damage very high, and then you gotta have them outflank your enemies. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going for the NPCs in this game. I won't say they're the greatest AI ever, but they are at least challenging. One area of this game that I think is impressive regardless of what kind of player you are or what kind of video games you like is the amount of detail that Ubisoft has crammed into Manhattan. The city looks gorgeous. The environment looks great. There's a lot of people saying that they dumbed down the graphics and that the map wasn't big enough. Let me just tell you from playing it so far, I do think the map is big enough. I think the graphics are incredible. Sure, it might not have the most advanced shaders in the world when it comes to texturing and stuff like that, but the amount of polygons and details that they crammed into every single environment is truly, truly impressive and often breathtaking. The same goes for the character building when it comes to gear, your weapons, your cosmetic items. There's tons and tons of cosmetic items for customizing your character and making them look unique. And in addition to that, there's a lot of weapons that look very, very cool. They're very authentic. They're very true to what's available on the market today in terms of modern firearms. And they offer you a huge variety in scopes and optics and just cool stuff that affects your weapon in neat ways. And it makes it that much more enjoyable to character build in this game. And if you're a big gearhead and you know lots about about guns and gear and items, you're going to appreciate all the detail in this game, because there's a lot of cool optics and magazines and stuff that is very, very authentic and true to life. Some of the small things that I appreciate are that you sling your secondary weapon on your back when you're not using it. So if you get a sniper rifle for backup or a machine gun for backup, it's going to be resting on your back the whole time, and when you need it, you can take it off and other people can see it on your back, so they'll know what kind of arsenal you're packing. And those are just the kind of cool little attentions to detail that are all over this game. So when it comes to the campaign, I actually really enjoyed playing through it. Some of the side missions were a bit repetitive. I didn't mind it too much because you didn't really have to play as many side missions. In fact, you could skip a lot of them if you didn't want to play them and just go on to the main missions, which were a bit more fleshed out. Granted, there's only a few moments where there was truly epic and cool stuff going on in the side missions. Felt like they were trying to go for more realistic engagements, so you weren't going to see these grandiose Call of Duty set pieces going on all the time with like huge armies and tanks everywhere. The coolest things that I saw was maybe like a Black Hawk helicopter and some big fuel refinery explosions, but other than that, nothing too grandiose went on. Most of it was just sort of working through a bunch of bad guys. And I guess you could take criticism with the game and say that, yeah, a lot of the missions were very similar in the sense that you just sort of kept fighting harder and harder versions of the same baddies over and over again. There are 4 different gangs in the world, and they each have their own specific types of bad guys for variety, but once you've fought them all and played against all of them, then you've pretty much seen all the kind of bad guys that you're going to run into. So there is no truly special or unique stuff that kind of throws you for a curve. And I think they might have been able to do a little bit more with this creatively. They might save it for the DLCs, but I think just for the campaign itself, which lasted about 14 to 16 hours, they could have added in a little bit more specialty with some of the baddies or the bosses that you fight. That being said, I did still really enjoy playing through it, and it scales and integrates perfectly for team play, and also provides you with a lot of easy tools in case you want to play with other players, but you don't have any friends that you know that actually own this game. You can just party up and do some matchmaking for people who want to run the same mission, but in a party instead of solo. So campaign-wise, the game was enjoyable, though I don't know how much I would want to replay it. Most of what I was looking forward to in the end game is the Dark Zone, and this is probably one of the bigger letdowns of the game, and I have a feeling I'm going to be tired of it fairly soon if Ubisoft doesn't completely redesign how the Dark Zone works. And surprisingly, they've actually said that they are going to redesign how the Dark Zone works. But basically, what I was led to believe is that the Dark Zone would be this lawless environment where you had to watch your back and any player could engage any other player. You could steal loot off of each other and it would be nail-biting and crazy and hard. And it's none of those things, unfortunately. Basically, the Dark Zone is an area that players can go into, and then you farm and kill NPCs, just like you would in non-Dark Zone areas. The only difference is that other players can kill you in these circumstances, but they don't want to because the penalties are so insanely high. For somebody who really enjoys competitive shooters and PvP and strategies against other players, this was going to be the ultimate zone for me. I could craft my character and work on them for months and get them to be as effective at combat as possible, and then go into the PvP area and just have fun and wreck people. And I can't really. I mean, you could, but the game is basically saying don't do that because we're going to penalize you so much for it. And it really sucks. It's just the Dark Zone is such a letdown when it comes to PvP. Literally, the entire rest of the game, the whole huge map around Manhattan, is designed to farm NPCs and get gear from there. So is the Dark Zone, yet the penalties for PvP are so high that nobody does it, especially at higher level Dark Zone areas. So basically they've just created a Dark Zone, which is kind of a harder area to do PvE gear grinding. And it is harder and it's fun and challenging against PvE, but I want my PvP, and that is just so far not in the Division right now. And if you wanted to get into the Division for PvP, I can tell you straight up, don't get the game if that's what you're looking for. The PvP at the moment is not there. And I want to believe Ubisoft when they say that they're working on redesigning the Dark Zone and how it functions, and that it's going to be better in the long run, but we'll just have to wait and see. They have been pretty quick about patching the game and updating things, but it's also been a little bit concerning. For example, they recently just patched the game like the day before making this video, making it so that it's so much harder to get some of the gear that people were just farming farming and getting tons of early on. But they patched it in a way where it's 10 times as hard to get that gear now. So if you didn't get that gear before like a day ago, then it's going to be literally 10 times harder than people who got it before you. So it could be the difference in like 10 hours to get the gear versus 100 hours to get the gear. That's a pretty big balance change, and it kind of reflects the fact that it doesn't look like they spent much time balancing this game at all to begin with when it comes to the end game. Now, if you're a PC player, there are some PC concerns. I've already run into numerous hackers. There is supposedly some sort of anti-cheat system in the game, but I do know that one of the main anti-cheat systems that's supposed to be up and running in this game is not going to be for something like a month, provided that it actually ends up working in a month time frame. That's just sort of the time frame that they're working with. So right now you're going to run into players that are absolutely going to insta-kill you with wall hacks and do everything you can possibly think of when it comes to cheating, and just absolutely wreck you. And this is beyond frustrating. What's even worse is if you try and log out of the game and log back on to get put into a different dark zone instance, a lot of the time it puts you back in the exact same instance. So I just had a situation where I kept running into hackers. They were killing me every single time, lowering my rank in the dark zone. I couldn't do anything about it. And then I basically couldn't log off and log back in because it put me in the same server. So that's kind of game breaking right there, and they have to fix the hacking issue on PC. And as much as Ubisoft wants to distance themselves from the word PC port, this game is a PC port when it comes down to it. It's a very good PC port, but there are areas of the game that you say, yeah, this system was definitely designed for console. The user interface is a little bit console-y. It's hard to select some of your ammunition types, and in fact, some of the items you can't scroll all the way down to see their attributes unless you plug in a controller to the computer to scroll down. So there's just elements of the UI that haven't been fully refined to work on PC. That being said, the game does still play pretty stably. I had a few crashes, and I think a lot of them were related to the recording software I'm using, which is kind of a letdown that it doesn't record well, but for the average gamer, you're not going to need to do that. So the game itself is pretty stable overall, though you might have a hard time getting a higher frame rate. Part of that, I think, is due to the fact that there's just so much detail in this game. It's pretty hard to hit those higher frames. Also, the cover-based system, I think, is designed pretty much for console, and on PC it feels a little less intuitive. And there's also just issues where endgame I find myself really not using cover that much, or finding it more of a hindrance rather than a benefit. And I just so desperately sometimes am wishing that I had a crouch key rather than a hide behind cover key. Now overall, there's a lot of great things about The Division. The scale of the game is incredibly impressive. The detail is great. The co-op gameplay is engaging and fun. It's a great game to play with friends, and there's a lot of content there. The single player should keep you busy for 14 to 20 hours or even more, especially if you want to play some of the higher level challenging missions, which will take you a couple hours to beat alone. Basically, everything leading up to the end game is good, except for the end game itself. And it really sucks because this is one of those games that I want to sink my teeth into. I want to spend a lot of time playing, and it just feels like all I'm going to be doing is PvE grinding to try and get better gear to maybe one day be able to play PvP, but it's just not integrated yet to the game, at least in a desirable way. And I hope Ubisoft changes this. I've seen a lot of similar complaints online, a lot of people really upset with the way that the Dark Zone works, and I think getting it working is absolutely essential to the success of this game in the long run. If they get it working, The Division could be an amazing package overall. At the moment though, it just offers some really engaging and fun co-op gameplay against NPCs, a decent storyline, impressive visuals and stuff like that, which is certainly nothing to turn your nose up at. But if you're hoping for an ultimately epic PvP endgame, it certainly falls short. We can only hope that Ubisoft remedies this as soon as possible, and if they're looking for suggestions, they are all over the internet. People have been crying about this since the beta. We'll have to wait and see what Ubisoft does. I hope this video has better explained what The Division was if you're on the fence about getting it, and helped you make up your mind about whether or not you want to be an early investor or maybe wait to see what becomes of the game in the long run. As always guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is LevelCap signing out.